Hello and welcome back to Beckler Guitars and Repair. And today we're checking out a first year model of the Fender Squier Classic Vibe series. This is a 50s Telecaster in natural blonde. And yeah, I just picked this one up used, and we're just going to go through it today and see what's wrong with it, if it needs any repairs, make sure it's all original, fix any problems that it might have, and just do a deep dive and review on it. There's a lot of hype behind these guitars, so let's see if it's deserved. Let's check it out. So I picked this up today, and the guy just handed me the guitar. It didn't have a case or a soft shell case or anything else like that, so I'm going to have to find something that'll work for it. But if you're not familiar with the Classic Vibe series by Squier, they came out in 2008, so this is the first year of this model. This is the 2008 as well. This is the 50s Telecaster. They had other ones too. They had a 50s Stratocaster, they had a 60s Strat, they had a 50s Tele and a 60s Tele. And these guitars have been extremely well received. Everybody was talking about these guitars when they came out, and they were really praised for their super high quality and their playability and how well they sounded and all the quality parts that were in them. They went through different iterations over the years. They changed where they were made. So the first batches were made in China at the Grand Reward factory. And then they moved to Indonesia, and then back to China, I believe, at a different factory. But these initial release ones from China at the Grand Rewards factory are becoming pretty sought after, and people are asking pretty hefty price tags for these things nowadays. Here's a couple listings I found on Reverb for the same year guitar. And you can pretty much find these used sometimes for really, really great prices. I picked this one up for a very, very nice price. And it does need a little bit of work, so that's kind of what we're going to be going through today. Going through everything, seeing what kind of work it needs, doing a setup on this, making sure everything works. Just basically getting this thing playing as best as it can. And then we're going to do a review on it. I'm also going to go through all the different parts, and we'll take this thing apart. So yeah, pretty cool specs on this guitar. It's got a pine body, which is what the original Teles were made of way back in the 50s. And it's got a vintage blonde finish, which is like, kind of like a whitey yellowish finish. You can see the grain through the finish, so it's kind of a thin finish. There are a couple chips in here too, but they're very surface level, so the finish on this guitar is actually quite thin. And they're called Classic Custom pickups on this, and they're actually made with Alnico 3 magnets. So the pickups on these have been very well reviewed, so they're supposed to sound quite nice. So I'm excited to try those out. Then we've got a single ply black pickguard with a vintage style Tele bridge plate. It's got the brass rounded barrels on there as well. And then we've got a little bit of pitting in the hardware. So it's kind of got a vintage sort of a look on this guitar. And it's using the three-way switch, the classic Tele control plate with the volume and tone with these knurled metal knobs. And this is a classic 25.5-inch radius, 9.5 fingerboard radius. This is a one-piece maple neck, and it's got the lacquered fingerboard on there, which is pretty classic Tele. It's got the black inlay markers, and another cool feature on these Classic Vibes is they actually have a wooden truss surround there. Usually the cheaper ones have plastic, like the made in Mexico ones and the Chinese ones. And the higher end ones are actually walnut. So this one actually has real wood for that, and a 50s style headstock design. It says Squier Fender Telecaster. And it's got vintage style machine heads with a vintage style string tree. Let's have a quick look at the back. Another look at that nice grain on the back. And yeah, string through design. It's also got the side mounted barrel jack. And the neck plate says Squier by Fender. Yeah, and this is a one-piece maple neck with the skunk stripe. And there's a little bit of figuring in the neck too. Some nice flame. And another look at the vintage style tuners. And we can see that the CG is from the Grand's Awards factory. That's the designation there. And the 08 signifies it's a 2008, so first year production. Alright, so yeah, it's a pretty cool guitar. Right off the bat, I can see some issues with it. The action is huge on there. I look down the neck and there's a lot of relief in the neck, so I got to tighten that truss rod. And I haven't plugged it in or checked the pickups or anything. I basically just grabbed it and left. So let's get it on the bench and check out some of the specs. Alright, so this pine guitar is a little bit on the heavier side. So 7 pounds, 13.9 ounces, so almost 8 pounds. Or 3.57 kilograms. This is my first time plugging it in, so let's see what kind of ratings we get from the pickups. Make sure the electronics are all working. And here we are. Okay, so it looks like the bridge pickup is reading at an 8.46. So these are the single coil Alnico 3 pickups specially designed for this guitar. And in the position, it's reading a 7.02. And in the middle, a 3.90. So it looks like the electronics are all working. It looks like someone didn't use this very much. There's not a lot of wear on it, but it looks like it's just been sitting for forever. The last owner had super thick strings on here. These are like 11s. And some of the frets look pretty oxidized. These strings are all rusty. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the strings and then we'll check out the electronics. Alright, so let's have a look at the electronics. So underneath the pick guard, oh, there we go. So there's a look at the pick guard. It's single ply, black. It's got some shielding around the neck pickup there, which is kind of cool. And then there's a look at our neck route. So it's actually routed for a humbucker. So that's cool. You could actually swap out to a humbucker on the neck if you wanted. And the neck pickup is just mounted to the body here. It looks like with some foam underneath there. Let's go ahead and remove that. Here's a look at the neck pickup. So you've got that little foam piece on there that helps you adjust the height because it's mounted to the body. And yeah, it just looks like your standard Fender pickup. I don't really want to rip the foam off to look underneath because it's glued on there. Here's a look at the route. The route is clean. It's got shielding paint in there, and there is a factory code on there, serial number A27766. And so this style of pickup, you actually have to remove the pick guard to adjust because you don't have access to these screws unless you remove the pick guard. So it's a little bit more of a hassle to adjust the height. You just need to remove the pick guard first. And let's have a look at the bridge pickup. So the bridge pickup, again, looks like a standard Fender Tele pickup. It does have a model number on it, the TCA2B Fender BK. And the route looks very clean as well. It does have shielding paint in that route as well. And there we can see our ground wire that goes to our cavity. So that all looks good. And just another look at the vintage style bridge here. So it's a string through, and it's kind of faithful to the the vintage ones. It's got the brass saddle or barrel style saddles there that you can adjust, and it does have string guides etched into the barrels as well. And here's a look at the control cavity. So yeah, it looks like they're using full-size pots, which is nice to see. And we've got our green capacitor there. It looks to be neat wiring. The switch looks a little bit cheap. It's like a standard import 3-way switch. These are fine. I just find they fail a little bit more often than, say, the Fender style. But the route looks nice and clean. And it looks like another wire is being grounded to the shielded paint inside the cavity. So here's a look at our neck pocket. So you can see that really nice pine wood grain there. And there's no shims in here from the factory. So that's a good sign. There's also no stress cracks on the side by the neck here, which is very common on Fenders. And here's a look at the neck. Looks like a nice piece of wood. It's definitely a one-piece maple neck with the skunk stripe. And we do have a date on here, so it's 2008, 6th month, 17th day. And yeah, let's check the neck fit. It's actually a pretty nice fit. Kind of snaps into place, and it's fairly tight. So actually, it's a better neck fit than a lot of Fenders I've seen. So that's nice. And yeah, the route looks nice and clean as well. And while the neck is off, let's just have a better look at our frets. So they look to be a little oxidized and rusty. However, they're not marked up or used at all. There's no fret wear. They just could use a good polish. So I'm going to make sure I do that when I set this guitar up. And the specs call this a synthetic bone nut. So that's most likely plastic or some variation of plastic. And it appears to be well cut though. And here's a better look at our truss rod channel cover, which is indeed, it doesn't look like walnut, but it looks like maybe it's rosewood. And a better look at our vintage style tuners. These feel quite nice. They're super tight and responsive. And I really like that vintage style string tree as well. So overall, I'm pretty impressed so far with the quality. So I'm going to go ahead and restring this thing and buff the frets and set it up, and then we can check the setup. And here's a quick look at the frets after polishing. They buffed up really nicely. So yeah, now they're just super shiny, super polished. They look good. So yeah, I managed to get a really nice setup on this guitar. So using my notch straight edge, you can see that there's very little space in between the fingerboard and the straight edge. So that tells me that the neck is set nice and tight, and there's very little relief in the neck. And then in the 3rd fret area, you can see that when I use the 3rd fret, that the string is resting just gently on that 1st fret. So that tells me that the neck's nice and straight. We've got very nice action in this area, and the nut is well cut. And then using my depth gauge at the 12th fret, we can see that at the 12th fret, it's between a 0.75 and a 1 millimeter on the low E, and about the same on the high E. So yeah, very nice low action. And I did check this fingerboard with a fret rocker, and there was no high spots at all. The frets are actually really nice on this thing. There's no sharp edges either, and they're all nice and level. And now they're super polished. So I'm just going to go through this entire fingerboard just to make sure there's no buzzing or fretting out anywhere. I like to speed up this part, but if you want to hear it in real time, just slow down your player to 25%. So yeah, very nice low action with no fretting out or buzzing anywhere. And yeah, the neck feels good. It's a modern C neck, so it's a little bit skinnier. I typically like a bigger neck, but this still feels quite comfortable. And acoustically, yeah, it plays nicely. It rings out quite nicely. and it rings out for quite a while. Alright, let's get some neck specs. I seem to have misplaced my digital calipers, so we're going with these analog old school ones. So neck depth, or sorry, width of the nut is just about 1.7 inches, or about 43 or 42 millimeters. And at the 12th fret, it's about 2.05 inches, or about 52 millimeters. Neck depth at the first fret is about a 0.80 inches, or 21 millimeters. And at the 12th fret, it's about a 0.87 inches, or about a 23 millimeters. And here's a look at the neck profile. So it's just a modern C rounded neck. It does flatten out a little bit by the 12th fret though. Alright, before we plug it in, let's just quickly go through the condition of the guitar. So I did notice a few dings up here on the headstock. The truss rod works well, turns freely, and the frets are nice and super polished now. There's no fret wear on this guitar at all. It looks like it wasn't played very much. And on the body, got a few little marks and impressions you can see when you hold it into the light. And the finish is really thin, which is usually not the case on these cheaper guitars. They're usually really thick finish. But this one, I think, will let it breathe a little bit because it is quite thin. There's two little chips here in the front, and you can see how thin the finish is just by feeling kind of the finish there. And there's a little bit of pitting on the metal, on the hardware. But overall, not bad. Another little chip there. Switch around to the back. A few more little chips, dings here on the back. You can really see that nice wood grain through the thin finish on the back. And everything on this guitar is original. There's the neck plate. The neck's in nice condition. There's some nice flame in the neck as well. And the tuners work really well. I was quite impressed with these tuners. They're nice and tight, and they stay in tune really well. And there's our CGS 08 showing this is a 2008. Alright, so let's go ahead and get it plugged in and see how this thing sounds. I'm plugged into my 1965 Fender Bassman. I find it's a really honest amp, so what I mean by that is if the guitar sounds good, it's going to sound good through the amp. If a guitar sounds bad, it typically sounds really bad through the amp. So I just find it to be a nice, honest amp that really accentuates the natural properties of the guitar. And I'm miking up a 212 cab with an SM57. I'm also using a condenser mic for the room. And then for pedals, I'm going to be using a Honeybee Barefoot Effects overdrive and a Flint Strymon for reverb. I'm going to go through each position clean and then with a little bit of overdrive. Sounds great clean. The Alnico 3 pickups are quite nice. They're not too shrill at all. Like sometimes Tellies can be really ice picky. That's not the case with this. It's got some really nice mids in there too. So yeah, great sounding pickups. Let's try it with a little bit of dirt. Final thoughts on this first year classic vibe 50s Telecaster in vintage blonde. I'm honestly quite blown away at the quality of this guitar. I've tried quite a few classic vibes, but never this like first run. It's probably the best one I've ever played for sure. There's just not a lot of bad things to say about it. It's really made of really nice high quality materials, like a pine body for the telly. It's a one-piece maple neck. It's got some nice flame in there. The pickups sound great. The Alnico 3 custom designed pickups for this guitar really do sound awesome. They have got really nice mid-range too. They're not too shrill, but you can really get that nice telly spank out of them as well. The fretwork was really nice. I was able to get this nice and low with no buzzing or fretting out, and there's no sharp ends. They were kind of oxidized and rusty when I got them, but they're super nice and shiny and polished now. I really like the look. I like the look of that vintage blonde finish. Kind of that off-white kind of a finish that you can see right down to the grain of the pine. So I think that looks great. Condition-wise, it's got a few little bumps and dings. Like there's a couple little dings and scratches throughout, but nothing that affects playability. And the hardware's a little bit pitted, but it kind of gives it that nice vintage look as well. It stayed in tune really well, and it's not too heavy. It's not the lightest Telecaster ever, but it's kind of got that really nice, good weight. It feels substantial. It doesn't feel cheap at all. I like the little touches, like the vintage style tuners, which worked really well. The vintage style string tree, the tinted, you know, aged look of the neck. It's got the lacquered fingerboard on here too, which I really like on tellies because it just makes it so smooth to bend. I guess my only criticism of this guitar is the neck is just a little bit too small for me. I like a little chunkier, more of like a full rounded C on my necks, but this one still felt comfortable. And yeah, you can find these guitars used usually for some really good prices. People in the know are kind of asking more for these now. If you go on Reverb, there are some listings that are quite a bit higher now, but you can still find great deals on these used, so keep your eye out. They're great guitars. If you're interested in this particular guitar, I'm going to have it up for sale on the Reverb. Just check the description for the link. But other than that, thank you for tuning into Beckler Guitars and Repair, and I'll have more for you really soon. Thanks a lot.